The envelope is beige and slightly too big for what's inside it. No logo you'd recognize, a window with your name showing through, printed in a font some accounting department picked out in 1997 and never revisited. Inside is a check for $411 and a statement itemizing barrels and 1,000 cubic feet of gas produced last month under a parcel of West Texas you have never seen, never walked, never once looked at from the window of a plane. You don't own that land. Somebody else farms the top of it, or grazes it, or lets it sit. You don't own the rig either, or the trucks, or the crew that ran the pad in the July heat. You own a sliver of what comes out of the ground. That's the whole thing. When the pump runs, you get paid. When it doesn't, you don't. And when a pipe fails and the workover crew bills $40,000 to fix it, that bill has your name nowhere on it. $411. Not life-changing. But the check came in the mail while you were doing something else entirely. A few miles away, a friend of yours owns a piece of a song catalog. 40 songs, none of which were hits this decade, all of which were hits once. Every time one of them plays behind a car commercial, or gets dropped into the third act of a streaming show, or gets shuffled into somebody's Friday night playlist in Rotterdam, a fraction of a cent moves. Multiply that by 40 songs and a few million plays, and it becomes a number that shows up quarterly. Your friend cannot play a guitar, has never written a lyric, never booked a tour, never sat in a studio at 2 in the morning arguing about a snare sound. That friend owns the right to collect. Not the song's creation, not their promotion, not the career of anyone who made them. That's the mechanic, and it's worth saying plainly before anything else in this video gets complicated. A royalty interest is ownership of a slice of the revenue an asset throws off, not ownership of the asset's operations, its costs, its payroll, or the risk of running it. Somebody else does the work. Somebody else eats the expenses. You own a percentage off the top, and it arrives whether that month went well for the operator or badly. Now here's the part nobody puts together. That mineral check and that song catalog aren't two hobbies. They're the same structure wearing two costumes, and the structure has 6 floors, 6 rungs, 4 industries, 1 ownership logic, stacked in order. Each rung's checks buying the next rung, starting at $15,000 and ending at $500 million. Level by level. Let's build it. You start where that beige envelope started, under the ground. When a piece of American land gets sold, 2 different things can change hands, the surface and the minerals beneath it. They can be split. They frequently are, sometimes generations back, by a grandfather who sold the farm but kept what was under it and then died without telling anyone clearly. The result is that mineral ownership in producing basins is scattered across tens of thousands of heirs, most of whom have no idea what they're holding, some of whom would very much like to convert an unpredictable quarterly check into a lump sum today. You are the person who buys it from them. Your first purchase is a mineral package in a single county, a few hundred net royalty acres under acreage an operator is already producing on, or has permitted to drill. $15,000. That's the entry. Not a metaphor for the entry, the actual entry. Small mineral tracts trade in that range constantly, at auction, through brokers, through direct mail offers that heirs finally answer. You buy the right, and the county clerk records a deed with your name on it. Then the machine starts, and the machine's most important feature is what it does not do to you. A mineral or royalty interest is non-cost bearing. This is the sentence the entire video rests on. The operator pays to lease. The operator pays to permit, to drill, to case, to frack, to complete, to haul water, to run the pump jack, to insure the crew, to plug the well at the end of its life. If the well comes in dry, the operator ate that. If the well needs a $200,000 workover in year 4, the operator eats that too. You get a percentage of gross revenue off the top of production before those costs exist as a concept anywhere in your accounting. You do not touch a drill bit. You never meet a payroll. You never sign a service contract or argue with a vendor about a chemical invoice. Your entire operational responsibility is having a mailing address and a bank account. So you buy more. Another county, another operator, deliberately, because you want your checks spread across different companies' drilling schedules. A package in a basin where the wells are older and shallower and the decline curve is flat and boring. Boring is the point. Boring is what you're buying. 15,000 becomes 60. 60 becomes 200. Every check that lands gets recycled straight back into buying more acres, and because you carry no operating costs, essentially all of it is available to redeploy. This is not a niche you invented. Viper Energy built a public company doing exactly this. buying and aggregating mineral and royalty interests, nothing else. And after its combination with Sitio royalties in a deal reported at roughly $4.1 billion, the pro forma company was reported around $15 billion in market capitalization, the second largest public oil and gas mineral and royalty company behind Texas Pacific Land. Kimball Royalty Partners runs the same aggregation strategy and has been reported near $2.8 billion. Neither of them drills. They buy the right to collect, then buy more of it. You are doing that on a driveway-sized scale with the same paperwork. 10 years of buying, reinvesting, and buying again, and your mineral royalty book crosses roughly $2 million in owned interests. Rung 1, complete. You own a slice of what comes out of the ground in a dozen counties, and you have never once been to any of them. Rung 2 starts the moment you notice that your friend's quarterly statement and your mineral statement are the same document with different nouns. Both list units of something consumed, both apply a percentage, both arrive without your involvement. One says barrels, the other says streams. So you go buy songs. Not new songs. You are never in the business of betting on whether something will be a hit. You buy catalogs that already exist and already earn, with 5, 10, 15 years of payment history you can lay out on a table and look at. A songwriter in her 60s who wrote 4 singles that still get placed. A producer's share on a run of album cuts from 2011 that quietly do 8 million streams a year and always have. An estate that would rather have money now than paperwork forever? There are 2 things you can be buying, and it's worth knowing which. The publishing side is the composition, the melody and the lyrics, the thing that exists before anyone records it. The master side is the specific recording. Both throw off royalties, they just come from different pipes: streaming, radio spins, mechanical royalties, performance royalties collected by the societies, and sync, the placement fee when a song lands in a show, a film, a game, a car ad. Sync is the lumpy one. Sync is also the one that can double a catalog's year. The mechanic is identical to Rung 1, which is exactly why you're here. You own the right to collect. You do not write. You do not record. You do not tour, promote, negotiate with a label, pay a studio, fund a music video, or manage anybody's career. The artist's work is already done. That's the entire point of buying catalogs with history instead of signing new ones. The costs of making the thing were paid permanently by someone else years ago. Pricing runs on a multiple. In music, the number people quote is a multiple of net publisher's share, annual earnings after collection costs, and during the 2020 to 2022 buying wave, catalogs were changing hands at multiples reported roughly in the 10 times to 20 times range, depending on how old the catalog was, how stable its earnings looked, and how much sync upside a buyer thought was sitting unexploited in it. Hipgnosis Songs Fund was built by aggregating exactly this at scale, publicly, and when it later disposed of catalog, one such sale was reported around an 18.3 times historical net publisher share multiple. Round Hill Music was doing the same thing in the same window. Treat every one of those published numbers as reported, not confirmed. Catalog prices leak through press releases and interested parties, and a startling share of the figures that circulate are estimates dressed up as facts. You underwrite off the statements you're handed, not off a headline. You start small. $200,000 for a partial publishing share in a catalog of 40-odd songs priced at the low end of that multiple range because the earnings are flat and unglamorous. Flat and unglamorous is what you want. You are buying an annuity, not a lottery ticket. Then the mineral checks keep landing and the music checks start landing, and both go into the next catalog. Then the next. You buy a producer's back end. You buy an estate's publishing. You buy the boring half of a genre nobody's competing for. Your own music royalty interests cross roughly $15 million. 2 asset classes, 1 logic. Neither of them requires you to make anything. Rung 3 opens at 15 million, because that's the size at which a different kind of seller becomes reachable. Somewhere there is a university tech transfer office sitting on a royalty. 20 years ago, a lab in one of its buildings figured out a molecule. The university licensed it to a pharmaceutical company, which spent a decade and an enormous amount of money running it through trials, getting it approved, manufacturing it, and building a sales force to put it in front of doctors. The drug works. It sells. And every quarter, a small percentage of net sales flows back to the university under a license agreement signed by people who have since retired. The university does not want to check every quarter for the next 9 years. It wants a building, now. You're the person who buys that. That's a pharmaceutical royalty, the right to a percentage of net sales of an approved, already selling drug bought from whoever invented it, a university, a small biotech, sometimes a founding scientist personally. The biotech version is even cleaner in its motivation. A company with one approved product and 3 more in trials is burning cash on the pipeline, and it can either dilute its shareholders by issuing stock or sell you a slice of a revenue stream it already has. Plenty of them choose to sell the slice. Say the mechanic again, because at this scale people start assuming it must have gotten more complicated. It didn't. Non-cost bearing. You do not run a clinical trial. You do not fund a phase 3. You do not manufacture a pill, validate a plant, pass an inspection, negotiate with a payer, or send a single rep into a single clinic. The company keeps all of the operating cost and all of the operating risk of commercializing that drug. You own a percentage of what it sells. Off the top. Your first one is small and unglamorous, a partial royalty on a niche-approved therapy with a defined patient population, a stable prescription base, and years left on its exclusivity. $3 million for the interest. You underwrite it the same way you underwrote a mineral package. How long does it produce? How fast does it decline? What's the credit quality of the party writing the check? Then a second, then a basket, deliberately spread across different therapeutic areas and different expiry dates, so no single patent cliff can take out your year. This is the largest and most institutional version of the exact trade you're making. Royalty Pharma was built by doing nothing but this, acquiring royalties on drugs other people invented, developed, and sell. It holds royalties across roughly 3 dozen marketed therapies. Its portfolio receipts have been reported north of $3 billion a year as of 2025, and its market capitalization has been reported around $27 billion. It has never discovered a drug. It owns the right to collect on drugs. That's the ceiling of your mechanic, and it's public, and you can read its filings. Your pharma royalty interests cross roughly $60 million. 3 asset classes now: ground, songs, medicine. Not one of them has ever asked you to operate anything. Rung 4 is the one that makes people uncomfortable, because it's the first time you're collecting from a person instead of a pump or a playlist. Drive past a strip center. There's a sandwich chain, a smoothie place, a tax prep storefront, a quick lube. Every one of those signs represents a contract, and inside that contract is a line that says the operator pays the brand owner a percentage of gross sales every single week. 6%, 5, 7, in some categories. Off the top of sales, not profit, sales. Now look at who paid for what's behind the sign. The franchisee signed the lease. The franchisee financed the build-out, bought the equipment, hired the staff, ran payroll, ordered inventory, ate the shrink, absorbed the bad week when it rained for 9 days. The franchisee carries the workers' comp and the food cost and the manager who quit in March. None of that touches the royalty. The royalty is non-cost bearing, exactly like the minerals and exactly like the drug. The store can have a terrible month on margin and the royalty still gets calculated on the top line and remitted. And the number that matters most, when a franchisee opens a new location, your royalty base grows and you spent nothing. No lease, no build-out, no hiring. Somebody else just funded your expansion because they wanted a business. So you buy the royalty rights themselves? Not a store, never a store. You acquire the brand-level royalty streams of smaller franchise systems, a regional chain with 120 locations, a service brand with 200 owner-operators, a niche concept nobody in New York has heard of that quietly clears the same 6% from every unit. These systems change hands constantly, and their founders are often in their 60s, and they've usually never been told what the royalty stream alone is worth separate from the operating company. The capital markets have been very clear about what it's worth. Whole business securitization exists largely because franchise royalties are such reliable cash flow that they can be bonded like infrastructure. Domino's has repeatedly issued securitizations backed by its domestic franchise royalties in deals reported in the hundreds of millions. One of them reported around $825 million. Dunkin's franchisee payment-backed securitization through DB Master Finance was reported around $2.6 billion. Institutions do not lend at those sizes against something fragile. They lend against a percentage of system-wide sales that has never once been contingent on whether a given location made money. That's the same stream you're buying at a scale where the sellers still answer the phone themselves. Your first brand costs you 8 figures and pays quarterly. Then a second concept. Then a third, chosen because its unit count is growing and its franchisees are opening locations you'll collect on for the next 20 years without signing anything. Your own franchise royalty interests cross roughly $150 million. 4 asset classes, thousands of people in 4 industries going to work on assets you have a percentage of and no obligation to run. Rung 5 isn't a new asset class. It's the constraint you hit at 150 million, and it has nothing to do with finding deals. You have more deals than money. Every week something crosses your desk, a mineral package in a county you already know, an estate's publishing, a biotech that needs 18 months of runway, a founder in Ohio with 200 franchisees, and a bad knee. And you can only buy what this quarter's checks paid for. You're a cash buyer in a market where the good sellers want to close in 30 days. So you stop buying one royalty at a time and build a structure that buys them. Everything you own goes into a single entity whose entire business is acquiring royalty interests, oil and gas, music, pharma, franchise, one underwriting desk, one legal template, one collections operation. It is not a fund, and you are not selling anyone a share of it. You own it. It exists so that the 4 streams sit in one place and get counted as one thing by the people you're about to borrow from. Then you borrow against the cash flow. The mechanic is the part worth slowing down on. Lenders price against the durability of the cash they're being repaid from, and royalty cash is the most durable kind there is for a specific structural reason. None of it bears operating cost. A lender looking at an operating business has to underwrite margin. What happens when labor costs jump? When a plant goes down? When a competitor undercuts you? A lender looking at your book underwrites only volume and price at the top line, because every operating risk underneath sits on an operator, a label, a pharma company, a franchisee. Their margin compresses, your percentage doesn't move. Read that again in its shortest form. Your debt is serviced by other people's operating risk. That's why the structure can carry leverage that would be reckless anywhere else, and it's why every serious player in every one of your 4 categories eventually made this exact move. Viper and Kimball borrow against aggregated mineral cash flow to buy the next package. Royalty Pharma runs a levered balance sheet against a diversified book of drug royalties to fund the next acquisition. The franchise systems bond their royalty streams and use the proceeds to grow. Nobody in this business scales on retained earnings alone, because the moment your book is big enough and diversified enough, the cheapest capital available to you is capital secured by the book itself. And diversification is doing real work now. Oil prices break and the music side doesn't care. A patent cliff arrives and the franchisees keep remitting weekly. 4 uncorrelated payers make the whole thing borrowable in a way any single one of them alone would not be. So you buy at 3 times the pace. The entity's owned royalty book, ground, songs, medicine, storefronts, crosses roughly $300 million. You didn't invent anything to double, you just stopped waiting on the mail. Which brings you to the last rung, and to the reason the bond market exists. A bank loan against your book is fine. It is also the most expensive money you will ever use again, and by 300 million you've outgrown it. Because there's a tier above a lender. Above the lender is the bond market, and the bond market will pay you more for the same cash flow at a lower cost. For one reason, a bank is one institution deciding how much risk it wants on its own balance sheet, while the bond market is thousands of buyers each taking a slice of something that has been sorted, rated, and structured until it looks like infrastructure. So you take the last structural step. You securitize. Mechanically, it's simpler than the word suggests. You move the royalty streams, the minerals, the catalogs, the drug royalties, the franchise rights into a bankruptcy remote entity whose only job is to hold them and collect. Its cash flows get modeled decade by decade. Rating agencies look at the payment history you've been accumulating since that $411 check, and at how the 4 categories behave when one of them has a bad year. Then bonds get issued against it and sold to institutions, insurers, pensions, credit funds. They buy a fixed return, paid out of royalty receipts in a defined order. What you get is the trade at the heart of every rung in this video, run one final time at the top of the ladder. You hand over decades of future royalty checks. You receive an enormous amount of capital today. And you get it cheap for reasons that are now familiar. Your collateral is diversified across 4 uncorrelated payers, so no single shock takes the structure down. Your payment history is long and documented, and none of it, not $1 of it, bears operating cost. There's no plant to keep running, no workforce to keep employed, no margin to defend. Bondholders are being repaid out of gross revenue lines belonging to operators, labels, pharmaceutical companies, and franchisees, every one of whom is bearing their own costs and their own risk to produce the number your percentage is calculated on. This is not theoretical, and it isn't exotic. It is the standard capital structure of an entire industry, The Domino's and Dunkin' deals from Rung 4 are precisely this: franchise royalties packaged into bonds at hundreds of millions and billions apiece. Royalty Pharma runs the same logic against drug royalties. The mineral aggregators run it against production. Every ceiling player you've met in this video reached the size it did on this exact sequence. Buy the right to collect, prove the cash flow, borrow against the cash flow, buy more rights, then let the bond market refinance the whole thing at a price no operating business could ever get, precisely because you are not an operating business. It is the same move you made with a $15,000 mineral package, with 3 more zeros and a rating agency in the room. The proceeds go straight back out the door into the next tranche of royalties, and the book compounds against itself. 6 rungs in, the securitized royalty empire is valued at roughly $500 million. 6 rungs, 4 industries, 1 ownership logic. And the checks arrive on the days you work and the days you don't in exactly the same amount. Go back to the beige envelope, $411, a statement full of barrels, a parcel of West Texas you'd never seen. It looked like a curiosity, a quirk of inheritance, a rounding error, the kind of thing you mention at dinner and nobody follows up on. And your friend with the 40 songs looked like someone who'd gotten lucky in an unusual corner of the entertainment business. Neither of those was a small version of a different game. That check was rung 1. The catalog was rung 2. They were the first 2 floors of a building that tops out at $500 million, and the only reason they look like hobbies is that nobody drew the rest of the staircase. Here's the thesis, one last time, in the plainest form it has. Every rung on this ladder is a right to collect. Not one of them is an obligation to operate. The operator drills the well and eats the dry hole. The artist wrote the song and the label paid to promote it. The pharmaceutical company ran the trials and built the sales force. The franchisee signed the lease, hired the staff, and took the bad quarter personally. Somewhere behind every dollar in this structure, a person is absorbing cost and risk you never touched, and the payment they send you is calculated off the top before their problems begin. That is the entire difference between a royalty empire and a job. A job pays you for hours. A business pays you for margin, which means it can also charge you for margin when things go wrong. A royalty pays you for a percentage of somebody else's top line, forever, and sends you nothing to sign. And the ladder climbs in order: 15,000 into minerals, compounding to 2 million. 2 million into catalogs, compounding to 15. 15 into pharmaceutical royalties to 60. 60 into franchise royalties to 150. Then leverage against the whole diversified book to 300. Then the bond market to 500. No rung skipped. No rung funded by anything except the checks the rung below it was already producing. You didn't build a company. You bought a percentage of everybody else's in 4 industries, and then you got the capital markets to pay you decades in advance for the privilege of collecting it. The mailbox never changed, only the number in the window.